Welcome back, FreedoniaCon 26. It's time for train chat with Brad. Sorry, Brad. No voice.
Yeah, no, that's already. So with 1879 doing the Americas books next, I figured the main discussion I would have would be some of the difference between British and American rail, and particularly in how it's going to play out with 1879, but, general questions as well, because they are two very different beasts. So, just some of the main points that I'll highlight, I can just kind of talk and ramble for a while. As people have questions, shout and let me know. I will totally interrupt and go into any tangents or anything like that as they come up. But so your main differences between British and American style rails, you really need to think of it as the two different styles of engineering, and pretty much anybody who works with machines will understand. You have your high-end precision, mathematically perfect, aesthetically beautiful. We're going to design this and we're going to make this, pristine. That's your British side of engineering. And then you have, damn it, I'm going to duct tape the thing and make it work. That's the American side. American steam very much beats the hell out of the rails. It is very rough and ready. America is so much bigger than anything anywhere in Europe. We've just got massive distances to go. You have to have a machine designed so that it can just keep moving. There was very much just go, go, go. Whereas the European and the British styles, they very much would manufacture the rail so that it would, so that they would do the engineering for the rails so that they would accommodate the steam engines. So you try to run an American steam engine on British rails, and you're going to beat the hell out of your track because the engine's so much heavier, so much heavier loading gauge, and so more weight, and so just the machine itself will just pound and beat the hell out of everything. You try to run a British engine on American gauge rails, and the tracks are so rough and ready because we've got such a big distance. We have to scramble and cobble everything together as quick and as cheap as we can. The British engine's going to just fall off the rails because the tracks are just not as precise, and it's going to have a hell of a lot harder time running just between the two. Even
So
though
you're
they are
saying for
still
me
on
to
the
blow
same
these trains
gauge.
off the tracks, I just have to get a British one and put it on the American rail, and now it'll be easy?
Well, it wouldn't necessarily. Could
Darn it, Brad.
the although I've given you stuff before, there are plenty of ways to blow up a train.
I know.
But the U.S. military actually did an experiment where they were seeing how much it would take to actually get a steam engine to just completely run off the rails. And once it's up to speed, it's actually really hard to get a steam train to stop going. They removed, I think it was like 300 yards of track, and the steam engine just had so much forward momentum once it was up to speed, it just kept going. Like it would roll. It was beat to hell, and it needed some serious maintenance, but it just kept moving. So there are actual differences
So
for.
Philip asked if there was a gauge difference between the
So
British and American.
there are different gauges that are used in different places, but for standard gauge, they are the same gauge. Standard gauge, for those who don't know, is 4 feet 8 1/2 inches. And what the gauge is the distance between the tracks. That determines how wide your wheels are, wide your axles are, how wide the rest of the engine can be, all of your framing, all of your rolling stock that goes behind it, and it determines how expensive the track and everything else is to build. Obviously, wider rails means you have a much wider base. It's much more stable. You can go at much higher speeds. You can carry much heavier loads. The downside is everything gets a lot more expensive, and it's a lot harder to build, and you can't turn as well. It's really great for going straight ahead, but it's a hell of a lot harder to turn when you have that much wider of a gauge. With narrow gauge, it's a lot cheaper, a lot more rough and ready. You can wind it around like mountains and around a lot of different obstacles. But with the narrow gauge, you also can't carry as much weight, and your engines and your rolling stock are a lot less stable. So you have to design with those qualities in mind. But there are different gauges that are used in different areas. I haven't fully locked in how I want to consider it, but I'm thinking of having the Confederacy base theirs on 3-foot narrow gauge. There was a lot of 3-foot narrow gauge that was used in the Confederacy and in those regions, particularly around the plantations. They used a narrower gauge so that you're taking up less farmland. Uh, and there was quite a bit of narrow gauge that was used up in like the Colorado Rockies and that sort of thing, just when you had to deal with the mountain terrain. But they would still have standard gauge that would run through and do the mainline runs, spanning across the country. And then as far as narrow gauges that are in Britain, in the rest of the UK, and everywhere else, there's gauges of darn near every size. Just kind of depends on what the needs were at that particular time. Poking around to look through the discussions and questions and that sort of thing. Yes, railways in Japan. Most of the Japanese railways were narrow gauge as well. Japan actually does have a fair amount of mountainous terrain. So actually, I believe the one that we based the dreadnoughts off of, it's actually based off of the JNR design. And I believe that one in Japan is actually run on narrow gauge as well, just for the reference pictures.
Yeah, you run narrow gauge where there's tight turns that you need to make.
Yes,
like where I live is narrow gauge as well, because of a mountain range and that the railway basically runs along. Well,
yeah,
the railway
exactly.
is initially established. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, 3-foot narrow gauge is probably the most widely used narrow gauge in the U.S. But of course, there were other gauges that were used in different places. For Europe, I don't know the most common, but I know there's so much more of different gauges that were used over there. It runs the gamut in a lot of different places.
I haven't been caught up on the more recent books. Do you have a Bayer Garrett style locomotive in 1879 yet?
Garrett locos were mentioned in the, I believe it was the Companions.
Right. Good.
Which realistically is sooner than they should have appeared, but that was, I mean, there's a lot of things that have shown up a lot sooner than they should have appeared. The loco that we have for the JNR design was way too modern for what it should have been. That was really more of like a 1950s loco. I had to do some retroactive fluff for the designs for things because that one was way too big. Doing it in standard gauge, there was no way that loco would have been powered without using an auto feed mechanism for the coal. And a mechanical stoker. So I had to write that in. It was originally written that it was using powdered coke for the loco, but there's no way you'd run a loco that big on powdered coke.
No, it does seem a little unrealistic.
Yeah, so I retroactively changed that. So they are coal burning particular. I did, however, use powdered coke for a specialist locomotive, which was designed to be more of a stealth design for use in the Grove. And that one was using. I actually designed it so that it's basically using like a Stirling engine on each axle, and then it can selectively choose which engine, how many engines it's running, so that it can conserve its fuel supply and run with less heat, so that it's less detectable by creatures, forces that use heat sight. it's only going to be able to pull a couple of wagons, but if you're running a specialist operation and that's all you need, you could make a lot better use of that. There's just the JCPenney steampunk catalog. I have thought of making a book for that and just making all kinds of steampunk gadgets and machines and everything like that. I don't know where we would put it in, but if we do it, I would call it Blood, Sweat, and Gears.
It's better than a pun on rigor, at least. Rigor is for the naval combat book, I think.
Yeah, we haven't done a lot with the naval combat, but I think if you did naval combat, you'd probably have to combine Sea Navy and Air Navy, just because there's so much to talk about with airships.
Well, they use lines too, so yes, call that book Rigor.
A question about luxury train cars. I have talked about the different train cars and rolling stock and things before. I did a lot of it when we were discussing the AGR, the Ellison Grove Railway in Fort Alice. So that one I got to go into a lot of different things, and I definitely want to talk more about when we get into the Americas book. We're going to talk a lot more about the railroads and everything there. That is actually one where kind of the framework for everything as we go over in the Americas book. The Transcontinental Railroad got pushed back with the history of 1879 because of the Civil War. So that's going to be the major reunification project, and that's going to be our framework as we go through the Union, is looking at everything traveling along the Transcontinental Railroad. And I'll also end up talking about the municipal railroads for the different locations, because we're going to focus a lot on the different gateway cities. So, like, you have your railroads in New York, which all went subway, and then you have Chicago that all went to the elevated tracks. Well, for the most part, all went to the elevated tracks. And then, like, you've got things in Colorado which are all surface mount. And why are they all different? And we'll get into the differences there. A lot of it comes down to the ground type of what you had available. New York's made it a lot more feasible for just tunneling. Chicago, we got a lot more. Yeah, it's a lot more mushy. A lot softer ground, so it made it a lot. It just made a lot more sense to build up and go above the streets in order to get it off of the ground traffic. Of course, New York it has a different problem because you're going underground. Steam engines don't do that well in underground environments for that long. You got to deal with all the ventilation. You got to deal with the heat buildup. You get a lot of smoke. It just becomes very complicated to deal with. But we've already talked about in the Grove, we talked about using fireless locomotives. And those are mostly for doing the runs out to the airship fields, because you've got the airships in 1879 are all hydrogen filled. So a single spark will blow the whole place up. So they would use a fireless locomotive where basically they just have a tank that's filled up with steam from a static boiler, and then that steam pressure is used to drive the loco for wherever it needs to go. That way you don't have to deal with spark arresters or anything like that. But it'd be pretty much the same idea when you're in. We'll deal with for the New York subway. That's really kind of what they ended up doing, is just you would have a fireless loco, just a big tank of steam sitting in the front. It would get pulling the train along. When you stop to let your passengers off, you just connect it to a static boiler. It drains off any water's dripped out. Then it just pumps it full of steam, and then it just keeps going along. Oh yeah, yeah, Andre talking about the Canadian Pacific and all the year there. Yeah, Canada was its own thing, just with how much they had to build up. Because at this point, so much of it is just wilderness, and they really do have to build up so much of the infrastructure. But getting back over with some of the differences with the British and the American rail, you also have to deal with the difference there. So just for practical purposes, if you're dealing with engines or something in a game, it's very different in the coupling connections. British locos all use hook. They use a hook and chain coupler and then have buffers between the locomotives. American locomotives use a single connector, which has it's on a big spring mount to kind of handle the pressures bouncing between them. But at this point, they are switching away from link and pin connectors, and they'll start using some of the Janey connectors. And this one, I think I'll go ahead and put a picture in here. Give me just a second here. That's a good one from Wikipedia. So a link and pin connector looks something like this. You basically have these big metal cones on either end of your cars. You would have a link of chain that goes between them, and then just a metal pin that connects into that chain. Uh, you have to sit and hold the chain as the train cars are getting pushed together, so that you can connect them up. They said at the time they said that you could tell a new brakeman, because brakemen were the ones who would do the couplings, because they still had all of their fingers. It's very easy to lose a finger as cars are getting banged together and pushed around. So these were very dangerous, very unreliable. It was a very simple, mechanically, but very dangerous for people to deal with. Uh, Now, of course, nowadays we have modern knuckle couplers, and then Janey couplers were the start to that. Whereas you can just push the connectors together, and then they will just automatically couple themselves. And let me see if I can get a one for that. Here we go. So there you'll see the early Janey couplers where it's got that one's got the split knuckle. So that one, because things were in transition, they made them like this. So you can see where it's got the split knuckle. You could put a link and pin chain inside of there and then still connect it. Uh, so that way it would allow you to use multiple types of rolling stock together. And I'm going to copy this one so you can see what they look like when they are pushed together. So this is much more similar to what we use in the modern context. Different knuckle couplers. There have been designs to make the catches better, release better, and that sort of thing. But they all basically run under the same principle. As you push the couplers together, the knuckle locks into place, and then they just kind of hold on to each other. Made it a lot safer for crews that were coupling everything up. Of course, you still have to go around as you're connecting the train, make sure that the connectors are set into place. And when you're dealing with air brakes, you have to tie the lines together. And we're just starting to get into the era where air brakes were actually a thing. Most of them are vacuum brakes still at this point. And sorry if I'm pausing here. I'm keeping an eye on the chat, looking for different ideas, different questions, and everything like that.
Any plans to talk about, I don't know, the Navy's the American version of navies, I guess, whatever they were called there, in books.
Oh, I mean, the general term for them is MOW crews, maintenance of way, just the ones that would go through and actually build the railroads.
Yeah.
Yeah, there will be some discussion of that as we're talking about with the building up with the Transcontinental Railroad and everything. That did have some uncomfortable racial connotations because that's where a lot of slave labor went to. And then, of course, with the abolishment of slavery and with how things have changed with the Civil War, that's going to require some different changes for it. Probably still a lot of the same people doing a lot of the work, but they'll actually be paid. So just change some of the cost factors. And again, we'll get into some of the different costs and where the union's getting some of the money. I don't want to get too much into that because that gets into a lot of spoiler territory.
Well,
but
okay. Then
things like that are big.
Is there scope for a Blazing Saddles parody adventure?
You probably could do something like that.
Since that starts on the railroads.
That is basically how the railroad companies work. Dag, that was lucky we almost lost a $400 cart. And then just completely ignore the people getting stuck in the quicksand. Yeah, that is very much how these things went. And they probably still would go that way. It's just, frankly, at that point, they're just lucky they don't have to pay their paycheck.
Well, take your savings where you can.
Unless they had an next of kin that they got to pay it out to. Of course, we have all Blazing Saddles memes, but yes, very, very much. There's going to be we're going to be rife for a lot of Blazing Saddles references in these books.
Oh, good. Now I'm looking forward to the trip to America in the books.
Probably also going to have a lot of Red Redemption references in here as well. Particularly once we get more towards the western end. Yeah, I'm trying to avoid some of the tropes of all the Deadlands and everything like that. I mean, you have to have some of it just because it fits for the era, and that's where a lot of it is. But I don't want that to be the only thing that we have going on. And there is a wealth of different information of things. But the Union does still span both coasts, so even with some of the changes in what states are actually ratified and everything like that. But so we will have quite a bit of area to cover.
Fun quirk of geography.
Yep, exactly.
Sorry, I don't have anything interesting or useful to ask about. I love trains too, but
I had a dumb question.
Some of the chat go through too. Go ahead.
Do you have any ideas of any creatures that you want to introduce in the Americas, in the U.S.?
I've had a couple of things come to mind. I'm trying to think of ones that are worth mentioning and ones that won't be too spoilery. I am thinking. I will say this. I think we will probably introduce some of the more tall tale American culture in dealing with a lot of the Fae. Yes, jackalopes would be one of those.
Well, I think that'll be fun.
I know I've been thinking about bits and seeing some of the sort of the High Plains Gothic and the weirdnesses of the
I don't know that we're necessarily going to have like
the
Babe's Blue
heartlands of
Rocks
America
is something in
Your
there,
country's
but you know, stuff like that.
Your country's ridiculously big and ridiculously empty, even in the busy bits.
Yes, there is a lot of space.
And from a British perspective, it's boggling because you know it's just so much space.
Well, it very much it's very much the, you know, when you live out in the woods, it's at night, you don't go staring at the woods. You just let the woods do their own thing.
And the children of the corn and all of that sort of thing, and that sort of.
Well, the children of the corn is basically just the Midwest, and I say that as someone who lives in the Midwest.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to start a fight in the Midwest, you try to say which state has the best corn.
That's actually pretty true.
Yeah, that's.
Saskatchewan. Thank you. Has the best corn. Them's fighting words.
Oh yeah, you talk about who's got the best corn. That will start a fight.
Pirates. We're gonna talk about pirates in 1879 in the near future, or privateers.
Well, I don't know that we're gonna have pirates on trains. I mean, there definitely were criminals on trains, but
I was gonna say I have relatives that help rob trains. That's a whole thing. Train piracy. They just didn't call it that. I think they were just
it was really more
band
just
of
bandits
outlaws.
rather than
the whatever gang.
The Hole in the Wall gang.
It honestly, it was always some name gang, and there were a lot of them.
A lot of them, you just name it after whoever the leader of the gang is.
Yep. But not pirates. Are you going to talk about train robbing?
Oh, there's definitely potential for train robberies. And this is why you talk about the couplings and that sort of thing, because you need to understand how the train couplings work to steal the train.
It is helpful.
If you're going to disconnect it.
That is helpful.
You could also talk about as you're moving things around in yard operations, talk about polling. I don't think anybody else knows what polling is. So what they would do there, you're in a rail yard, you're moving your cars back and forth. They're all on parallel tracks. Rather than having to move your locomotive all the way to the end of the track where the switch is to move it over to the another one to move an adjacent car, you just basically pick up a super thick log and stick it in the corner of the train. You stick it in the corner of the car, and then the train just pushes the log. Very dangerous operation to do, but it worked, and then it saves you a couple of minutes. Oh yes, the different the baboon signal bin. Yes, that was definitely a thing. Yeah, signaling is its own topic. Those operations get ridiculous.
Signaling would be a great thing for a Byron or a Lovelace to be getting involved in, I've just thought.
Well, so much of it, honestly, is still mechanical. You wouldn't even necessarily automate a lot of it. They would deal a lot more on just manually switching your signals back and forth, and it gets all the different linkages. Even today, there's so much of it that's not electronically based. So there's still a lot that is mechanical, just because mechanically it's something you don't have to worry about a power failure.
Well, and a power failure could cause major crashes if it doesn't
Exactly.
turn where they're supposed to.
Or exactly. But there's no way for an electronic logical switch. You could have the track switch one way, but something could go awry and make the signal go the other way. You don't get that with a mechanical linking, unless somebody physically goes and changes the link. And it's a lot easier to spot somebody that's going over and messing with your signals. A lot of tipped over cars. Yeah. Now there very much was a lot of ones where they would just leave tipped over cars, particularly on like the logging railroads. Like if there was a car that just fell down the mountain, or even a locomotive, if it was just too expensive and too complicated to get it out of there, they'd just leave it. There's actually a couple locomotives that ended up being preserved that way because it was just too expensive to get them out of there, so nobody pulled them out to be able to cut them up. And then eventually, when somebody wanted to preserve the logo, they went back and actually went through the expense to extract it.
Do you have plans to do a New Orleans book?
We talked about I don't really plan on doing individual cities. Maybe eventually if we do like an adventure for it. But I don't want to do the focus that granular for right now. I'm really wanting to spread out more, doing the different countries and regions and cover the larger areas. Just get more information for some of that
So
perspective.
more a paragraph or chapter in a book, less a book.
Yes, and the main ones. The main ones we're going to cover for the Union book are going to be New York, Chicago, Denver, and San Francisco. Those are the four kind of major gateway cities.
Well, I would say St. Louis, because that's how you got across the Mississippi.
Yeah, but that gets into different changes with how everything lays out from the boundaries with the Civil War and the different history there. So much more of it is kept in the north, and we will spread out a little bit from there. But like for the direction the Transcontinental Railroad goes, I mean Chicago historically was very much a rail city.
It was. It was also very important to cattle drives.
It was for a lot of stuff. You had the Great Lakes, so you had all the canal traffic and everything that had come through. There's a lot more woods around Chicago than a lot of people realize.
And I think it's fair to say we've had thoughts towards New Orleans for the Confederacy book, so I know I'd had thoughts on it, so.
Yeah, we do want to get into that when we get into the Confederacy side of things. I really kind of getting into the bayou and that type of area, I want to get into more of the magical aspect of things they had, because that gets a lot into that culture with the like the voodoo and hoodoo culture, and I wanted to touch on those.
And sly vampire references, because
I mean, we put the references to darn near everything in here.
Yeah.
So, other than the gauge, what's some other major differences between the U.S. and like the UK in our trains?
So a lot of it, when you're talking about the gauge, like I said, is the same between them, but just how they were manufactured is very much the difference. Uh, with a British locomotive, they are very much engineered to be precision machines. And they tried to make them very elegant in how they were designed. You would not see a lot of external moving parts. They were mostly kept internal. Everything was covered. You usually see like driving rods and that sort of thing, but like your feed pipes and everything like that, they would try to keep a lot of that covered up. Uh, Harder to maintain, but it made the engine look nicer. It made it give it a very clean appearance, and it keeps it protected more from things going on. On the U.S. side, or from the Union side, you very much had everything exposed and available and open because you needed to be able to work on it. If the train breaks down in the middle of a run and you're out in the middle of nowhere, you're the engineer. You have to be the one to fix that. So you need to be able to get access to it. You can't always drag the thing into a pit facility to get into it. Very much with it even comes down to the terminology for it. With British, the UK side, you really would call what in the US we would call the engineer, because the engineer is going to do a lot more of that maintenance and that sort of thing. You would just have a driver. Their job is to drive the locomotive. They don't necessarily do the same level of engineering maintenance. I mean, they certainly know how to maintain their vehicle and can do some emergency repairs, but not always to the extent of what a US engineer, like locomotive engineer, would be capable of doing. For bogies on the locomotive, go to Andre's question, that does come into the differences with the type of layouts you would have. Very much on the American side, you would have more of your unpowered leading trucks that would kind of help guide the locomotive through curves. With British gauges, you didn't usually have as much of that. They had them as much smaller wheelbases for your power, because the tracks were built to much better specifications. But on the American side, they had to build the tracks quick and cheap. You needed the unpowered trucks to help guide the frames and to help it get around these curves, so that it could just handle the rougher rails. It really wasn't until we started seeing a lot of the combinations of the where American and British engineers started kind of getting together and looking at things, where you started to see more of the unpowered trucks showing up on British standard gauge locomotives. But like for the US, you would see a lot more of the consolidation class, which would be like a 280. And I talked before about the classifications for the white notation. So that refers to so 280 refers to the 2 unpowered wheels at the front of the locomotive, 8 powered wheels in the middle, and then it has no trailing wheels. So some of them would have, those numbers would change depending on the design. But you would see like the 8-wheel configurations on that on the American end. You typically didn't see that many powered wheels on British locomotives. They would usually tend to stick more around a 4 or 6-wheel arrangement. Once you get into the later years, then the designs start to change a little bit, because they're trying to just get more power out of everything. But so much of the U.S. was just needed all of that power. You would have a lot more you have a lot more wheels and be able to put that additional weight on the loading gauge. You would have a lot heavier locomotives because you're just trying to squeeze that much more power. The other part is that the U.S. is so much more based on freight for the rail traffic compared to in the UK and Britain, where there was a lot more passenger traffic. I mean, passenger traffic still was very prevalent in the time period, but it's even to yeah, but even so, it was still most of it was powered on the freight. That was the real moneymaker. And today, you see, really the amount of freight traffic we have is why we don't have high speed rail in the U.S. Spanning the country today, because all of the rails and everything are owned by the freight companies. It's not within their interest to spend the money on high speed rail. You have to manufacture the tracks to be able to support that. For them, it's much more beneficial having those rougher, heavier gauge tracks to handle the heavy weight that you have from shipping freight across the country. Yeah, same issues in Canada. Canada also has just is a lot more focused on freight than it is trying to move passengers back and forth. Which really it would make sense to have a high speed passenger rail network in the country. You wouldn't have to use so much for your flights, your air traffic and everything like that. But we are so between flights and car focused in this country, we just don't have the incentive for it. But if we could get it built and once it's in existence, there'd be a lot more incentives to use it. Yeah, that's pretty much true.
So, Brad, what's some advice you can give GMs for adding trains in their games?
So when you're running a train, with the train, think of the train itself as a location inside of whatever location you're running. As far as where you're taking place in for your in-game setting, your players are mostly going to be dealing with inside of the cars themselves, if they're assuming they're passengers and everything. So you can think of the train as its own self-contained location, and then that will carry you to a different space. Very much like you would think of with airships or anything like that for any sort of large-scale transportation. And once you start thinking of the train itself as a location, you can start to associate some of those other aspects to it. There's going to be logistics, and just like you would for like a city or a tavern, there's going to be people working there at that location. What are their stories? How do they tie into things? What sort of events have happened with the location? Same thing, what sort of things have gone on with the train? How's this function? You start to tie these things into your narrative and bring that in. And as far as how the players interact with the train, uh, yeah, they're most of the time they're not going to be interacting directly with the locomotive unless you're dealing with being like robbers or something like that. Most of the time they're just going to be interacting with it as it is the housing within the different rail cars and everything like that. So there's going to be, if you haven't, go look at some pictures of different rail cars. They're all of different things that you can see and how they function. Particularly, think of it very much like a galley in a ship. They have galley rail cars. Everything is designed to be compact and mobile and allow everything to move back. Allow people to move through. Uh, and keep it all contained. How everything is organized is focused with that, with the train all being in a line. Like you would have certain cars that would be in certain locations. Like typically you would have either, except for a galley car. If you have that one on it's a locomotive where you have a long enough train to have a galley, you would have that either at the front of the train or the end of the train, so that you don't have passengers going back and forth to the kitchen. you kind of close that off. The locomotive crews and that sort of thing, they would have their own cars and everything to be able for them to be housed in if they were going on a long trip. But even aside from actually being aboard a train, you can also use them as mobile, just large objects that would happen in game. That can be a barrier, like if you're crossing a road or something like that. The train can be very much a mobile barrier that can cause different disruptions and prevent pursuits. I mean, you see that when you're traveling on the road. Uh, it could be a handy getaway if you're working. Say somebody's trying to get away and they run into a rail yard. That's a chaotic environment. There's going to be a lot of very heavy rolling stock moving back and forth. There's a lot of places to duck around. So say you've got criminals on the run or players need to be on the run. That's a place to lose people very easily.
It could be a fun way to put a break in the middle of a fight, as you're having a gunfight and a train suddenly runs between the two of you.
Exactly.
Groups. Like we've got a round to catch our breath and do something else because we can't see those guys.
Or you could even jump on the train while it's moving and try to make a getaway that way. So there's a lot of different things that can go through, and very much to keep in mind. Once a train or rolling stock is in motion, it's really heavy and it's really hard to stop. So that's not going to quit moving very quick. So once you're on it, you're gonna, if it's moving at speed, it ain't slowing down very fast.
That looks like a book you'd like.
Crimes committed in Victorian Britain. Yeah, very much.
I did bring Brad a train book when I came to Gen Con last year.
Yes, you did. I still have it sat by my bed.
Yeah. And I've picked up a few. I've got a Bradshaw's Handbook, which is just commenting on it's a rail guide, basically a tourist rail guide from the Victorian era, and I have the 1863 edition. And I had a look through and found Lancaster in it, and for Lancaster and the next couple of towns on the thing, it mentions hotels and places to eat, and I recognise and know a few of some of these businesses because they're still going now. And it's kind of fun in that, just looking through and going, oh, look, I know that hotel.
And so many of those businesses were owned by the rail companies to accommodate travelers and everything. W.H. Smith's got its big debut in the stations, sell books for travelers.
And it's no longer, they've sold off the high street portion of the business, and it has to have an entirely different name.
Yep.
But the airport and railway ones are still owned and are still W.H. Smith's, and it's like that's just weird because it's such a fixture.
But that's where it got their starts. But yeah, hotels, restaurants, that's where so much of it got its start with with the railways.
But yeah, it's sort of reading through a book and going, wow, this is I can recognise, and also going how many places there aren't stations anymore because they've gone. Curse you, Dr. Beecham. Because we had a huge explosion of railway stuff from about the 1852, about the 1930s, and then post-war, so much of it was decommissioned.
Yeah, very much so.
But it's amazing how much of that they write and describe is still recognisable now. But that's just, I think, that's a British cultural inertia thing, I think.
Well, and it was very similar in the U.S. because so much of the culture went car-centric.
Yeah.
Is that pretty much everything that we use anymore is all freight for where it's going, or the handful of commuter rails that are around, but they're all disjointed individual networks. They're not. We don't really have like a national rail network.
No.
It would be awesome if we did.
Oh yeah, national high-speed network. It would make total sense, but somebody's got to spend the money and the time to invest in it.
I peered at it for Gen Con and looked at what is the feasibility of catching a train and flying in, say, Chicago and catching a train down to Indianapolis, but couldn't work out the timing of it. So.
Oh yeah, trying to take a train like for that, it'd probably take you 8 hours minimum.
Yeah, and I'm okay with that because I think it's quite a nice way to. It's a nice way to see the country.
It very much is if you can manage to get the space to go for it.
Yeah.
All right, Brad, I think you've got time for maybe one more question. So if anybody has a good one.
And of course, if there's any questions at any point, feel free to pop them in because I love talking about trades. So.
Yeah, and you're always welcome to join Brad in the 1879 channel. And if you're looking to maybe help write about trains, you can also get in touch with Brad.
Yeah.
Or me.
Well, I'm pretty
Brad.
sure we're dragging out Brad and Philip in. They seem eager. This is good.
Land is expensive.
It is expensive. Well, I mean, there's the whole eminent domain rules, things like that. You can do that for the railroads. They just don't for anymore.
There's a rail upgrade project going on in my city that was budgeted at $4 billion when it started in 2019. The government has stopped releasing updated financials for it, but the last figure from 2 years ago was $23 billion. And that's mostly on land they already owned because it's an infrastructure upgrade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because
Now you try and do
doing high-speed rail. Yeah, you have to engineer it to those specifications.
Well, no, it's not high-speed rail. It's metro. It's suburban rail.
Oh, so they're just doing suburban.
There has been talk in Australia every couple of years about doing a high-speed rail from up and down the east coast, at least between the major cities. Oh, it'll only cost $50 billion. You pull the other one. There's no rail corridor that's been provisioned. There's no eminent domain. It's idiots.
But
governments pretty much all suck. It's okay.
50 bill. No, like I would like a nice fast train so I could go down to Melbourne and see Dan for a weekend, but that's not going to happen. They're saying it's only going to be $50 billion to go from Sydney to Newcastle, which is a 5-hour drive at most in bad traffic. Like
so many of the logistical problems.
It'll cost $1 trillion.
Come with like air travel. Just go away with rails.
Yes, and some logistical problems with setting up railways go away with air travel. Like you don't have to pay for the sky.
Oh yeah, no, it's a more expensive initial investment to set up the infrastructure, but once you have it, it's so much easier. There's so much less you have to worry about it.
Even though everyone here lives on the East Coast, people aren't going to take it because it's still going to be slower than a plane. The distances involved. It's like trying to take a train from New York to LA flying would still be so much faster, even if it is high speed.
And depending, I mean, once you factor in all the logistical factors and everything, especially if you could get it set up with a high speed, but then you do a railroad service, which is basically just you drive your car onto the railroad car, and then the train transports you and your car. Think about it. You don't have to drive across the country, and then you just have your car wherever you show up. You don't have to rent a vehicle or anything like that.
Yeah,
Joel?
we've got those here too.
Joel,
Yeah.
how do you travel within the UK?
It depends. We actually do a lot of driving because, unfortunately, while we have a train service that is almost fit for use, the cost of train tickets is stupid for what we're wanting to do, and so driving places. If I'm on my own and Michelle isn't going somewhere, I tend to take the train, but that's because I don't drive. And when you're doing one person, train's about the same cost as driving, but as soon as you have two people going somewhere, driving becomes so much cheaper, which is a shame, because
most of the time when we visited and had to go to London to Manchester to Edinburgh, for example, we always flew because it was cheaper and quicker.
Cheaper and quicker. Yeah, there's a couple of places. London I love because London's got such a good public transport system. The tube and the couple of other strange adjoining train lines of various sorts it's got are just so easy to get around and so convenient. But London may as well be a different. London is its own thing compared to the rest of the UK. And it's great, and I wish we had more of that sort of thing. Because I'd much rather be able to hop on a train to get to places. But flying, I've never quite got into the habit of. But I know it's definitely easier for some stuff.
All right, Brad, you want to say goodnight?
Well, yep. Good night, everybody. If you want to talk more, like I said, I'm on Discord.
Thank you, Brad.